The play on the field, the courts, and the ice is just one part of sports. Behind every game are the people hard at work so we can enjoy the action. They're the owners, administrators, agents, broadcasters, and promoters who bring the games to life. Meet them when you go behind the game with Patrick Klinger and Bill Robertson. Welcome to a special year-end edition of Behind the Game. I'm Patrick Klinger. With me is the star of the show, the Hall of Famer and the pride of St. Paul Avenue, Bill Robertson. Bill, happy holidays.
Thank you, Patrick. Happy holidays to you and happy holidays to all our viewers out there.
Bill, we're going to do something a little bit different today. It's the end of the year. 2019 is almost behind us. We're staring at 2020. We're just going to riff on sports today. We're going to look back at the year in sports that was, look ahead a little bit to the coming year and some of the trends, some of the things that we think may develop in the business of sports. And I'm going to start out by just simply asking you what you think is the biggest sports story of 2019. It can be nationally or here in Minnesota.
Good question. I will say I'll have two answers for you. I have one nationally and one locally. I think for me the national story overall is Tiger Woods winning the Masters this year. His incredible comeback in the golf world really shook the sport up, and actually from that I think there's more people interested in golf and interested in playing golf, and his impact over the years has been incredible. So for me, on a national, or maybe you call that international scale, Tiger Woods has done it, and he did it this past weekend as the captain of the President's Cup, and the viewership for that was phenomenal. So I think people are really in tune to what he does, and when he plays well, when he's a player, people tune in.
And I think the Tiger's reemergence does so much for golf, because when he's not playing, people tend not to watch or pay as close attention, and when he's on the course and he's playing well, he's competitive, people tune in, and I think it just really bodes well for the future of sports.
Well, I was in a Golf Galaxy about a week ago and looking for some holiday gifts, and I asked one of the sales associates about the Tiger Woods line for Nike, and they said it's up 25% in sales in the past year, and that's an incredible number when you think about it. His line of clothing is more expensive than the average golf line for Nike or others, but it's up 25%. That tells you a lot about the man and what he means to sports.
Now, you said you had two.
Well, the other one I would think, I mean, there's on a local level, there's a couple things that I think were really important, major stories. I think the reemergence of Gopher football and the way they impacted the state of Minnesota as the only Division I school that plays football, and they did so well, and now playing in a January 1 bowl game, really tends for me to believe that people are interested and want to see this product do well. They want to will them to victory and want them to do well. They haven't for so many years, and they haven't been to a Rose Bowl since 1961. I'm 58 years old. I hate to say that, but I've not seen them participate in a Rose Bowl, and I'd like to see that in my time, and I think that's a great story right now on the local level, as well as a 1A and 1B in that part is MLS and Minnesota United and their new Allianz Stadium in St. Paul has done a lot to impact that Midway area, and I think they're going to be very, very good going forward.
You know, all very worthy of ranking as top sports stories of 2019. I'm going to throw a couple of other at you. I think the U.S. women's national soccer team winning another World Cup was a big story. You know, it keeps women's sports really in the spotlight. Tremendously gifted athletes, but it was something more than just winning on the pitch. Really, it was also about equality in salaries. You know, out of that win came a big discussion about how the female athletes, the female soccer players, were being compensated in relation to the men's U.S. national soccer team. And so in that sense, that win extended beyond what was happening on the field.
Fair point at all, and I think that even goes back even earlier to the women's tennis scenario back in the day when Billie Jean King stood up for women's equality and told the tour they were going to play as long as they got equal pay. And it took a long time before women's tennis in the pay scale has gotten to the point where the women are making close to what the men are making. And I think that's a fair point, as this has leapfrogged the women's soccer scenario, has done a lot for women in equality and women in sports.
I'd also offer up that salaries continue to be a huge story in sports. We've seen these incredible contracts in baseball of late, particularly with pitchers. The latest one was 9 years, $324 million. Insane amounts of money being paid for these players. You're seeing more guaranteed contracts in the NFL than you had before, or certainly more guaranteed money at least. So what players are being paid continues to escalate at just incredible levels.
Well, there's no question it has. I also say, look at coaching ranks, both professionally and collegiately, football and basketball in particular. Those sports, when you see Nick Saban, the Alabama coach, making, I believe it is $9 million a year as a head football coach, and now P.J. Fleck at Minnesota is the highest paid state employee. And Richard Pitino is number 2, is the second highest paid state employee in the state of Minnesota. That tells you a lot about where things are at. But I look at it too as, I think you and I have had this discussion offline before, is that even at the collegiate level, coaches are getting let go during the season, like in the professional ranks, but you never saw that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And it's all about winning now versus winning, here's my 5-year plan or 3-year plan or 10-year plan. You don't have those anymore. You better win quickly or else you're going to be out of a job.
Yeah, there's no question. The pressure to win, even at the collegiate level, is incredible. And obviously the compensation reflects that. If you're going to pay a coach millions of dollars annually, there's an expectation that you're going to be able to deliver.
Absolutely.
At the same time, though, interestingly, that attendance in a lot of sports, and college football is no different, is trending downward.
Yes.
Even historically great football programs like Ohio State and Alabama aren't selling out. And there's some concern about why that's happening and what that means for the future of the game.
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint one thing, Patrick. I think a lot of it is the ability to watch it on television in your own home on a giant 70-inch screen TV in HD. I think that plays a big deal. I think the hassle factor of going to a game and paying $40 to $60 to park and then paying for your food and your beverages and all that and getting in and out of the stadiums is becoming harder and harder for people to do. They might want to do it one weekend a year or 2 weekends, but they're certainly not going to do it 7 or 8 when it comes to football. And basketball is the same thing. They play 15, 16 home games in a schedule, and people can only commit so much time and energy and money to these things. That's why I think it's become problematic for sports and season tickets in general, in all sports, college, professional. People just can't commit that kind of time, money, and energy to that product.
Season tickets were always the lifeblood, right, of any sports team. That was really the foundation. And you're seeing season tickets in all sports really begin to decline for all the reasons you just mentioned. And time may be at the top of the list. A college football game is around 4 hours now.
Yes.
And then you throw in the time beforehand, the time afterwards to get home. It really is a day. And you have to commit basically that entire day to that one event. Baseball has got 81 home games, and the ability to attend that many games is nearly impossible now, particularly if you have a family.
Well, and I think you're seeing it too as long homestands in the winter sports. Let's take locally the Timberwolves and the Wild. You can put Gopher hockey and Gopher basketball in there, but just on the local level, I see that as people look at a 6-game homestand, which is nothing like a 10-day baseball homestand. It's certainly different, but it's spread out amongst the same amount of time. People can only commit to 1 or 2 of those during that time. They may not, they only go to 1. So you have all these games you're trying to sell individually in these winter sports with all the other high school and activities that young people have to do today. It makes it hard to do it. And the cost of going to games is problematic, in my opinion.
You know, that money has to come from someplace, right? And if you're paying one player, a pitcher who's playing once every 5 days, $324 million, somebody's paying for it. And it's, you know, it all trickles back to the fans, and the ticket prices continue to go up. And, you know, at a time when we're less inclined to give 3 or 4 or 5 hours to a sporting event, that's not a great combination.
No, and it is trending in the wrong direction for teams that are looking at this. They're going to have to figure out ways to entice fans to come, both young and old, to a game. Is that reducing ticket prices? Generally, as you know, you were in that business for a long time. Once you devalue something, it's hard to get it back to its original value or make it more. Another topic on this realm of sports behind the game would be just how does the in-game experience, how can that help a sports franchise, in your opinion, make it more palatable to come to more games?
I think it's a tremendous challenge for teams because when you're competing against those 70-inch televisions that you mentioned earlier, and you know, literally dozens of camera angles and replays and all that the television experience provides. Plus, the beer's a lot cheaper at home, the bathroom's a lot closer, the hot dogs are easier to get. You know, why go to the arena? Why go to the stadium? So the teams have to figure out how to make that experience so good that fans are willing to shell out the money and give the time to go. And you've seen more emphasis on game presentation than I think you've ever seen. When I first got in the business a long time ago, I was an intern with the Twins, and I was on the job 2 weeks, and they gave me the job of game presentation because that's how it was viewed. It was, you know, you sang the national anthem, you threw out a ceremonial first pitch, you said play ball, and that was pretty much it. Today, it's music and videos and, you know, mascots and pyrotechnics, and it's like a Las Vegas casino show.
And some people like that and some people don't. When I worked for the Walt Disney Company, the Angels tried all sorts of innovations using cheerleaders on the dugouts and all sorts of innovative things they thought would present a really good baseball scenario for fans, and it backfired on them, and they quickly figured that the game on the field was more important. But I'll say this, you brought up a point here about the experience. The ones that are getting the best value out of this are restaurants and bars, sports bars in particular, because they have the 70-inch screens and they have multiple screens. They serve beer and food and alcohol, and that they can get a fan base to come in and wear their jerseys, wear their caps, whatever it is, and watch the game on the big screens where they can hear the sound and cheer with their friends like they're at the arena or the ballpark, but they're not. They're watching it at a sports bar like a Buffalo Wild Wings or others that you can frequent, and they've made a living on sporting events, and it's an incredible situation. They pay those packages to get all those games streamed into their restaurants, but when you think about it, that is a huge opportunity for somebody getting in that business to bring in a crowd every night.
Yeah, no question about it. You know, what teams are also doing, they've really amped up technology in arenas and stadiums, almost to the point, I think, where they're beginning to detract from the experience. And let me tell you what I mean. if you go to a baseball game, it used to be that you'd go with your family, maybe your grandparents, buddies, and you could sit in the stands and have a conversation while you were watching the game and maybe enjoying a cold beverage, right? Well, now there's so much information fed to you by the team on your device, right? We're all sitting in the stadium with one of these, and they keep feeding you more and more, and what happens? Your head is buried in this. You're not watching the game anymore. And in some ways, I think they have to be very, very cautious about at what point are you just sitting in the stands looking at this, and at what point are you actually watching the action on the field?
Well, if you look at when Fox or CBS shows people in the stands, many times they're holding up their phone or typing on their phone when they show a pivotal play in a game, even in the World Series for that matter. And I look at that and go, aren't you watching the game? And I know that working in hockey, everybody's looking at the scoreboard all the time, and in football too, and not looking necessarily at what's happening on the field or getting a broad view of the play being set up. And I think what a waste. But I do know this, the younger generation, and I'm not going to say it's one generation or the other, but I know a lot of people want to have their phone out, they want to have their laptop, they want to have their split screen television and have all those devices working all in one as they're watching a game. For me, where I'm at, I'd rather just watch the game, and I want to put all that stuff aside and enjoy what I'm watching that night.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're becoming the exception to the rule.
Yes.
Technology has reached a point, certainly, the use of cell phones has reached a point in baseball that was announced just a couple of weeks ago that all 30 teams in the league will be extending the netting to protect fans from foul balls. And a major factor in that is the fact that people are looking down at their devices and they have no chance to protect themselves against a ball coming in at 100 miles an hour. Even under the best of circumstances, if they're watching the action, it's hard to protect yourself. But when your head is down and
Correct.
You can't move, we've seen some really tragic things happen in baseball this past year.
With the bat or the ball coming at you, it's terrible. Now, hockey did that a few years ago behind the net, and that was very controversial back in the early 2000s, and I think it was a good move, and I do think it's a good move for Major League Baseball. I think it should go all the way down to the foul poles myself, so you don't have that. But what that has done, too, Patrick, you think about some of the greatest plays in baseball history, or the most controversial. The Steve Bartman play in Chicago, that might have not happened if there was netting all the way down there. You couldn't do that anymore. But part of the problem with that too is the fans and the kids can't get as close to the players as they used to be. They're going to have to either roll up the netting so kids can get autographs. I see that as a downside to all this, but I do see during the games it has to happen.
Yeah, I don't know how with the size of the athletes today and the way that they're hitting the ball and and as new ballparks were built, there was really a desire, almost a pressure to move the seating closer to the action. Target Field, for instance, the closest seats at Target Field to home plate are only, I think, 45 feet away. That's closer than the pitcher is to the hitter.
Yes.
So as you move these seats in, and the balls are coming in faster than ever, you really have to do something to protect the fans. But you're absolutely right. One of the great joys as a kid of going to the ballpark, right, was to run down by the dugout and hope that a player would flip you the ball. And the netting is all the way down the lines. That's not going to happen anymore.
Yeah, this is how sports has changed, as we're seeing it every day.
Yeah. So tell me, what sports do you sense are trending upwards as we look towards 2020?
Well, I mean, I do think that the people are still really consumed with the NFL on television. It's a behemoth, and there's nothing like it because it's 1 day a week, and I think it's three days of rehash and 4 days of prognostication as you get ready for the next game. And I think that hasn't changed, and it's more amplified in the NFL, I think, than than college football, but college football is gaining. But I think the problem with college football, you talked about it a little bit earlier, is the 4-hour games. People don't want a 4-hour game, nor do they want a 4-hour baseball game anymore. So that's something. But I see the NFL as the one. I know that numbers are up for golf. There's less golf courses, but the numbers are up for people participating in golf, and I really truly believe that some of it has to do with Tiger Woods and his impact on the sport and what he's done, and people want to try to emulate that. As you know, you're a really good golfer. It's a hard sport. It takes time, money, energy, and it's really tough to play. And you put that kind of combination together, and it makes it hard to play. And then people don't want to do that on a regular basis. Even though you and I try to go out and try to emulate Tiger Woods' swing, we can't do it.
It's, as golfers, I think we're both excited to see that the sport seems to be trending back up again. And it was, I think it had been given last rites a number of times. People said millennials just don't have the time, they don't have the money, they don't care about an old sport like golf, right? Yes. Too deliberate, too slow. They need constant attention. Fortunately, I think we're starting to see it just creep back a little bit, and hopefully it continues that way. And Tiger does have a huge influence. One day he's going to step away in the spotlight. We need some really talented young players to step in and be able to take on that mantle.
You bet. I do think the sport that's in trouble, you talk about sports trending up, and I love the sport to play it. Always one of my favorites is tennis. The lack of, particularly in the United States, the lack of U.S. players coming up, being dominant, and the characters in the game, the John McEnroes and Jimmy Connors and Eli Nastasis, Bjorn Borgs. You can go back and think about all those great players. It's hard for anybody to name 3 or 4 tennis players, and it's such a great sport. It's an international sport. It's a fun sport to play, but it's losing a lot of ground here in the U.S. And the U.S. Tennis Association, I know, are trying very hard to fix it. But it's a hard thing to fix when there's so many people globally playing the sport, like the sport of golf as well. But I see that sport as one that's in trouble. Even though people tune in for Wimbledon and maybe the U.S. Open, but it's hard-pressed for anybody to say, I watched this tennis tournament from Stuttgart, Germany on a particular weekend, because there's so many other things to watch and so many other things to do.
Yeah, I agree, Bill. Back in the 70s and the 80s, maybe the heyday of tennis, when you had some of the greatest players in history, Jimmy Connors and McEnroe and Chris Evert, right? And they were household names. That's really not the case anymore. Sports fans might know Roger Federer and
Yes.
Rafael Nadal and Serena Williams, but after that, it gets
Right.
a little sketchy.
Right? It's a hard thing.
Yeah. Now, I read just the other day that viewership of the NBA is down 14% this year. And this is a league that, over the last decade, maybe did more things right than any other major sports league in the world. They expanded globally, had a big presence in China. Their players were superstars all over the world. But for some reason, it's going the wrong direction now. Any thoughts about why that might be?
Yeah, and I worked for the Timberwolves for many years, and I was in the heyday when Michael Jordan and Larry Bird and Magic Johnson were playing. So I saw that era and saw how they marketed the sport and how the game presentation worked, and it was a fun atmosphere to go for 2 hours and 10 minutes to a Timberwolves game or to an NBA game. I think one of the biggest problems, it is a global sport, and I'm happy it is global because there's so many great international players. I do think that the average fan in the United States who goes to an NBA game remembers this player that played 3 years or 4 years at a particular university. And now players are coming out of high school, they're coming from Europe, they're playing 1 year in college, the one and dones, and then they're going professionally. I'm not knocking that they shouldn't do that, but I think it's hurt because you knew Larry Bird went to Indiana State. You knew Magic Johnson went to Michigan State University. You knew all those things. Michael Jordan went to North Carolina. Bill Walton to UCLA. You knew that. Nowadays, it's hard-pressed to know where any of these players are coming from as they're coming up in the system. And I think it makes it really, really difficult for fans to engage in that.
You think regionalization of sports too is having an impact on it? So take baseball, for instance. There used to be Monday night baseball and Sunday night baseball, and this, the game of the week on Saturday afternoons with Kirk Gowdy and
Tony
Kubek, right? That's how you watched baseball often, because your hometown team was on, maybe a quarter of the games were televised.
And only road games.
Right. And so we knew everybody knew who Reggie Jackson was, and Johnny Bench, and Catfish Hunter, and Kirk Gibson. Right. Now, baseball's become so regional, and most sports have become regional, that you don't really you don't know who's playing on other teams to the same degree that maybe we did a couple of decades ago.
That's a fair point. I also think that players, now you mentioned some of those guys were traded over time, but nowadays a professional athlete is playing 4 to 5 years in a particular city, and they're moving on for more money or for a better opportunity in another city. And growing up, we didn't have the Harmon Killebrew played every year but one, much to my chagrin, with the Minnesota Twins, and played 1 year, sadly, with the Kansas City Royals. And Willie Mays played his entire career with the San Francisco Giants, except the last year of his career he played with the New York Mets. So you think about those players. Henry Aaron played with the Milwaukee Braves, then the Atlanta Braves, and then ended his career 1 or 2 years with the Milwaukee Brewers. And those were some of the greatest players of all time. And I look at that and think, well, those players were with those teams. You knew them. You knew that the Giants had Willie Mays and Willie McCovey. You knew the Yankees had Whitey Ford and Mickey Mantle. Nowadays, they leave after 4 or 5 years, and yet they're getting more money, and I can't begrudge them for doing that, but it's hard for a fan to be loyal to that, and that's why I think the numbers might be down some.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And if you think about baseball again in particular, the greatest players in the game could walk down almost any street in any city in this country, and most people wouldn't know who they were, right?
Yes.
And which is really
sad.
Yeah, it's but baseball's been written off many times, and I have a feeling it'll survive just fine. Hey, Billy, we've come to the end of the show. It's been a really terrific conversation. It's been a terrific year.
Yes.
A lot of fun. We've had some great guests. We've got some more great guests lined up for 2020. And it's always a pleasure doing the show with you, my friend.
It's great to be here, and you and your family and our viewers out there have a blessed and safe 2020, and I look forward to another year of this great show.
Fantastic.
Thank you, my friend.
Merry Christmas. Thanks. And thank you for watching Behind the Game. We'll see you next year.